Welcome to the I Fired My Boss franchise podcast. My name's Dan Claps, founder and CEO of Franchise Playbook, a franchisor platform where we create, own, and operate dynamic franchise brands in the mobile services space. And my life's goal is to help people just like you fire their boss and become a business owner.
And I'm Christian Dadalak, top franchise consultant and co-founder of Real Franchising, a leading franchise consulting firm. And together, we're on a mission to help people fire their boss, hire themselves, and live the American dream through franchise ownership.
Welcome to another episode of the I Fired My Boss podcast with your host, Dan Claps. Solo episode today, going to be talking about some lessons that I learned from a couple books that I've recently read or in the middle of reading. I just recently finished a couple books that have really spoken to me. And so a couple of these books I'd love to share in franchising. The first one is Grinding It Out, The Making of McDonald's, which was actually Ray Kroc's book or inspired by Ray Kroc. Another great book is The Outsiders, which is eight conventional CEOs and really how they grew their companies in special ways. And then another one is a funny title, but How to Make a Few $1 Billion by Brad Jacobs, which is a great book on building a culture and attracting great talent. And then finally, the book that I'm in the middle of, about 25% into, which is That Will Never Work, which is the story of Netflix, written and read by one of the founders of Netflix, Marc Randolph. And these are great books. I highly recommend all of them. But I wanted to share some of the lessons that I learned from these books that have really spoken to me. I'm going to start with just the one that really kind of inspired me to make this podcast this morning, which was on the way to work listening to this book, That Will Never Work. And as I was reading the book, one of the things that the CEO of Netflix said that I thought was really interesting was that one day, they had this beautiful corporate campus that, when Netflix grew to the size that it is, it's currently valued like $150 billion Netflix. But anyway, they had built this beautiful office and the CEO had been walking through the office and he happened to catch some of the employees that were actually in the company hot tub. So they had a hot tub on campus and he could overhear them basically complaining about the company. And it was really interesting to him because, he thought about like, if it's not the hot tub and the ping pong tables and all these things that, create quote unquote culture, then what is it? But what he realized is that, those perks are nice, but what actually makes someone love a company is when they have inclusion in the company, when their voice actually matters, when they're listened to, when they're treated like adults, right? When they're given autonomy. And one of the quotes he said in the book that I thought was really great was, the secret to Netflix was that they handpicked a dozen brilliant people, creative, brilliant people, gave them a set of delicious problems to solve, and then gave them the space to solve them, gave them the freedom to solve them. And I think if I think about, my kind of definition of building a great culture, it so much centers around this idea of recruiting really smart people, the brightest and the best in the world at their craft, getting them in the room together, working through problems together with mutual respect for each other and different backgrounds, right? And so if you think about the best teams, the healthiest teams, they're collaborative, but they're also not afraid of conflict, right? They work together and they have this ability to be candid with one another and work through problems and not be afraid to have, not be afraid to share their thoughts and really to avoid groupthink, right? Where the people can disagree, but eventually they come to the same conclusion. And I think it's most important when people disagree, but they're all working toward a common mission and a common vision, and they're bought in on that mission and vision, and they all share the same core values, even though they have diverse backgrounds and diverse upbringings and a different lens of how they see things. They can still work together to see a common vision and see it through, as long as they have mutual respect and trust and they're good people, etc. And so I thought this was really interesting, this quote. Handpick a dozen brilliant, creative people, give them a set of delicious problems to solve, and then give them the space to solve them. That really stands out to me when I think about, for example, what we're building at Franchise Playbook and Voda and the leadership team and the team, extended from the leadership team. We each have our own unique skills, right? And so we respect each other. It's like playing on a team of football, right? You have the quarterback has his own skill and the linebacker a different skill and the special teams, different skill, right? There's this mutual respect though, because you're all playing to win the game. You all have the goal of getting, the highest score on the scoreboard and winning, but you have different abilities and each member of the team is just as important as the other. And so when I think about building a company, whether it's in water restoration, a painting business, plumbing, non-home services, a gym, it doesn't matter, franchisor, everything when it comes to building a business is picking an industry, picking the greatest people to work together, and then curating this culture where, again, you're handpicking brilliant, creative people, you're giving them a set of delicious problems to solve, and then you're giving them the space to solve them. And it really brings me back to other podcasts where I've talked about as a CEO, as a business owner, your job really boils down to 5 key things, which is 1, to cast the vision, 2, to secure buy-in, 3, to provide resources, not just financial resources, but tools, technology, human capital, whatever resources are needed. 4, to hold people accountable to different expectations that are clear and scoreboards and metrics. And then 5, most importantly, is be a cheerleader, right? Recognizing the small wins and giving people credit when they deserve it. And so this book really just fascinated me. Now, obviously, it comes down to many other things when you want to build a business. Like, for example, with Netflix, they obviously picked a great industry. They were at the right time. They were ahead of the curve, but not too early. There was a lot of things changing in the buyer market at that time where VHS was starting to become outdated. DVDs were becoming a thing, but they inevitably knew that their business would shift. So I thought was so interesting is when they got into the business, they knew that DVDs, while they were ahead of this, being able to mail DVDs to people's homes, they knew that DVD technology was kind of a middle ground to where things were going, which where things were going was eventually they knew it was going to be similar to music where people were not going to collect and buy DVDs. They weren't going to, have this material hardware, if you will, that they had to use. They would actually start to download movies through streaming. And they knew, though, that although they had a small window with the DVD business, they could learn, they could build, they could adapt, they could build the resources to then inevitably shift into the movie streaming business. So they started as a DVD rental business, mailing DVDs, knowing that that business would evaporate and they would have to move toward streaming. But I just thought it was very interesting that they didn't get intimidated by that opposing threat of DVDs eventually going away. And I can relate that to franchising. So many times I think about people that are concerned about issues that may come out 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road in their business. But what you have to realize is when you get started in the business, you start to learn the business and you'll be able to see those future threats and opportunities in a more clear lens because you're already in the business. And so I think that's so important to understand that really it comes down to a lot of times it's not about waiting. It's about starting and then figuring it out as you go. And I'll give you another great example to parallel this to real estate. Right now I was looking at some real estate opportunities and I was thinking about the market's going to crash. We're obviously in a recession or secretly in a recession or heading toward a recession. Maybe the real estate market's going to change, but we've been saying that for years. And interest rates are going to change. You can always refinance a home. But I thought it was interesting, this quote I read similar to this concept, which was, don't wait to buy real estate and wait, right? And so it's actually better usually to get into things and then wait and let time pass. I'll give you a great example. If you get into a business and you hit a down economy, well, here's the thing to remember. You were going to hit a down economy eventually. I'd actually argue maybe it's better to get through the rough times of your business in the beginning. And then later when things are good, it'll be like icing on the cake. It'll be like a walk in the park, right? Because you're already in the business. A lot of times people ask me, how did I, get into water restoration and franchising with very little zero background in restoration and zero background in home services prior to being involved with Voda with my team. And what I tell them is that it might seem like this brilliant, idea that, came out of, the ether that, wow, they thought of getting into water restoration as a franchisor. And that couldn't be further from the truth. What happened was I was in a different business in the franchise space for so many years. And I was able to be exposed to different patterns and data points and information to then be able to clearly see a business model in this space. And, it's interesting. If I were to ever go into another business, that business would actually parlay from my experiences here. I'm able to see trends in our industry, in franchising, in home services, in water restoration and cleaning, because I'm in the business, right? And so it goes back to the point, yes, water restoration, cleaning, franchising, home services, all of these markets are going to change. AI is going to take a huge impact in all of these business models between franchising, home services, and water restoration and cleaning. All three of those, verticals, because they're really three separate industries that we play in. They're going to change. AI is going to change, and the internet's going to continue to change things. The socioeconomic situations and demographics are going to change. Generations are going to change, and buying patterns are going to change. But I've never allowed that to stop progress, because what I understand is that when you're in the business, you're actually usually able to see these patterns and these trends a lot better. And you're actually already in the business, which allows you the resources and the ability to pivot and to shift, versus saying, well, let me wait to see what happens and changes in the market. The market's going to change no matter what. Whether you buy the business now, a year from now, 10 years from now, you'll be dealing with new strengths, opportunities, threats, weaknesses, right? You're going to be dealing with a whole new SWOT analysis. But at the end of the day, getting into something is going to give you the ability to actually see things clearer than trying to put on your, academia hat and see trends. You're not going to see them the way that a business operator is. And so when I think about this for my audience that's listening to this, that's thinking about owning a business, I don't want it to sound like a sales pitch, but you're very similar to real estate. Again, unless you're undercapitalized or certain situations, but usually it's better to buy a franchise and wait than to wait and buy a franchise, or to start a business and wait than to wait to start a business, because you're going to evolve while you do the business. This is a short episode. Just want to thank you for tuning into the I Fired My Boss podcast. Going to have a lot more episodes coming out soon with some great guests. So thanks for checking this one out. If you have the opportunity, please leave 5-star review or a nice review for us. Trying to climb to over 100 reviews so I can start getting this podcast a little bit more exposed to the business community. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you soon.
You're f***ing fired.
If you want to say those words to your boss, make sure you head on over to ifiredmybosspodcast.com and fill out the form to schedule a no-cost consultation. And if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share with a friend who might also want to fire their boss.